So my name's Heather. I work for Newport City Council. I look after equality, cohesion and migration work. I'm really pleased to see that we've got so many people here this afternoon joining us for the session. I'm really pleased that we've been joined by so many of our partners who will be speaking to you today about EU citizens' rights in Newport. Before we go any further, and I'll do some housekeeping and things in a little bit, I'm really pleased to introduce Councillor Jane Mudd, the leader of Newport City Council, who's going to open the webinar this afternoon and talk a little bit about EU citizens and their place here in Newport, and just a thank you to the leader for attending today and saying a few words. So I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, everyone. It's so great to be able to join you once again to speak to you all, to really, I think, give our thanks as a City Council for all the work that you do. And I think it's really important that we recognise the fantastic partnership working that is ongoing, that does support people actually accessing their rights here in Wales. And it's these rights that I'd really like to talk about, because certainly for us at Newport City Council, we recognise that migration has brought huge social, cultural and economic benefits to our city over many years. And as a council, we want to continue to welcome people to Newport and ensure that those people who've chosen to call the city their home continue to do so. And this is so important. And to emphasise how important this is, I just want to share with you that every time the Cabinet meets, so that's once a month, we have a regular update on the impact of UK government decisions through Brexit on our EU citizens here in Newport, because we really want to make sure that people not only know their rights, but they know that they are welcome here. And it's really important within this that everyone who's delivering services or working with EU communities really understands the changes that have taken place. So we keep it on that public platform so that people are aware, so that they do know. And we're only able to do that and highlight those challenges because of some of the fantastic work that you are all doing. Now, we recognise that over the last few years, it's been incredibly difficult for our EU communities. We know that the levels of hate crime and discrimination experienced by EU citizens have increased since the EU referendum. And also that many people still feel unsure about their future. And sadly, as we all know, we recognise that the war in the Ukraine is also affecting many of our EU citizens who are feeling afraid, and they may have friends or family members in the Ukraine or surrounding areas. Now, as professionals, service providers and public service employees, it's really important that we ensure that our actions enable people to fully exercise their rights here in Newport, that people feel welcomed and people feel equal. I was really pleased to note during an event for St Nicholas Day that the council arranged in partnership with our local communities that 85% of people we spoke to said they were happy living in Newport. However, only 45% said that they felt welcome, and less than half said that they considered Newport to be their home. We can all do more to ensure that people feel part of our communities, that people feel welcomed and supported. So a huge thank you to everyone who's taken the time to attend today, and to our partners in Settled, Citizens Advice, TGP Cymru, Newport Mind and Newfields Law for all of the work that they've done so far in supporting the Council to continue to welcome EU citizens to Newport. And thank you all for the contributions that you're going to give today. Now I'm going to do something really cheeky now. I'd just like to say as well, as the leader of the City Council, we are doing a little bit of fundraising, or Newport City Council are doing a little bit of fundraising on the weekend, and I'm sure that Heather will give you the details of that. But if anybody would like to pop by, buy some cakes, buy a raffle ticket, get involved and really support the team in their efforts to raise some money to support the Ukraine, then please do so. So I know that there are huge efforts across all of our communities across the city at the moment to try and support this and do something about this. And I know it's a really cheeky plug on a very formal meeting, but please, if you are around on the weekend, pop into Newport and support the event.
The purpose of today is to really give people an update. So this is an event designed for professionals who may come into contact with or be working with EU citizens across Newport. We ran the same event last March, just as we were coming up to the deadline for the EU settlement scheme. And since then, we recognise that things have changed, circumstances have changed for EU citizens living in Newport. And there's considerable confusion, I think, in some instances around what people are entitled to if they are remaining in the UK and in Newport. So it's really a chance to update you on developments and to invite our partners to come and talk to you about their services, their experiences, and give you the benefit of their expertise in this area as well. If you're happy to, please pop your cameras on so that we can see faces rather than blank screens, but please do keep your microphone on mute unless you're speaking. We are recording this as well, so we will be sharing the recording after the session, as well as copies of the slides as well, so you'll have them for reference. If there are any questions that you want to ask, if you wouldn't mind popping them in the chat, I'll monitor them as we go along. And we will be a little bit short on time now, but we will aim to finish by 4 o'clock as planned. So if you don't mind putting your questions in the chat, and I'll keep a record of them, and we'll come to them when we've got the time to do so. Today's agenda, you can see, is on the screen now. So we've got 6 sessions being delivered both by the council and our partners. So they're short, sort of 5 to 8 minute long sessions about a range of different topics affecting EU citizens in Newport. And then at the end, if we do have time, we'll have a bit of a question and answer session if there's anything that you want to know that hasn't already been covered by the event. What we'd like to do to start, before we get into the sessions, is just get an idea and a feel for what people already understand about EU citizens' rights in Newport. So Alec is going to pop a link in the chat, which will take you to a short poll. I think there's about 5 or 6 questions on there, just asking you about your understanding of some of the topics that we're going to cover today. So once Alex popped that in the chat, if you wouldn't mind clicking on the link and just completing those questions, and then we'll do that at the end of the session again, just to see if this has helped with raising awareness. If you are a Newport City Council member of staff, you will have issues clicking on the link because it'll go via Internet Explorer, so you'll just need to copy and paste it into Microsoft Edge or Chrome for it to work. We'll crack on whilst you're doing that, if that's okay, just so we can catch up on time. Alec, can you go back to sharing the slides, please? Perfect, thank you. So our first short session is going to be delivered by Pavlina and Parveen, who both work for Newport City Council. Pavlina is our cohesion officer and Pav is our migration officer. So they're going to be giving an overview of the EU settlement scheme and also telling you a little bit more about EU citizens living in Newport. So I will hand over to you both. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pavlina Monto, and I do work in Newport City Council for nearly last 3 years as a community cohesion officer. I do work approximately from 2005 with EU citizens in Newport in different capacities, so for a very long time. And I've been through happy times when EU citizens when we joined the European Union in 2004, when we left the European Union, introduction of the new immigration status, and losing our freedom of free movement. So we would like to introduce you to EU settlement scheme and what does it mean for EU citizens in Newport with my colleague Parveen Bibi.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Pavlina. I'm a migration caseworker at Newport City Council. So I haven't been there as long as Pavlina, so I only started in August, but I've certainly learnt a lot and certainly about EU citizens. So I do hope you'll benefit from this session today.
Thank you, Alec. So we would like to start with a question. We would like to ask you, and don't worry because there's no wrong answers with this one. We would like to ask you how many EU citizens you think living in Newport at the moment. Do you think it's A, about 1,500? Or is it about 4,000 people? Or is it C, more than 8,500? You can shout out, you can write in the chat if you don't want to speak. Just let us know what you think. We'll give a couple of minutes. Some people are saying B, 4,000, another 4,000, somebody saying C, over 8.5. Yeah, mostly B's, I can see. Yeah, some people saying C, 8,500. So mostly C. So actually, can we go next, Alec? Actually, it's more than C, more than 8,500. It's more than 9,680 at the moment. From this EU citizens in Newport, we have EU citizens with settlement scheme, which is about approximately now 5,410. We'll explain the difference between settled scheme and pre-settled scheme. Then we have about 3,620 EU citizens who got a pre-settled scheme. We do not know how many people are pending applications at the moment who applied after the deadline and still pending applications, still pending decision. We also have people who've been refused. We also have people who haven't applied yet. And I think Pav can tell you more about our other migrants, asylum seekers and refugees.
Yeah, I mean, we do have other communities here in Newport made up of different migrant groups, including asylum seekers. And sometimes, for certain reasons, we sometimes think there's more than there are actually in practice. For example, asylum seekers, we've got only 500 in Newport. Failed asylum seekers and asylum route refugees, it's unknown. We don't have exact figures there. Settlement refugees, we've got about 150, and that's under the Arab scheme. If you look at other non-EU migrants, we're looking at about 8,000. And if we look at Hong Kong, we have got BNO Hong Kongs as well, single digits, and unaccompanied asylum seeking children. We do have small number as well.
Thank you, Alec. I think our lovely pie chart didn't load it. So we wanted to show you the visually, and it should be a little pie chart. We want to show you that in the Newport, we have approximately, as I remember, because it's not showing now percentage as well, it's about 5% of EU residents in Newport. Oh, sorry, I will have to get my other presentation to be able to give you the right numbers. Yes. So we have about 5% of all citizens in Newport, which are EU residents. We have about 6% which are other migrants, and about 2% who are refugees. So as you can see, that's quite a large number of population of Newport. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if you can't see it, but I can't see the pie charts. Next, Alec. So I would like to introduce you to EU settlement scheme. The EU settlement scheme basically enables EU nationals living in UK and their family members to obtain the UK immigration status. They will require to live, work and study in the UK after Britain leaves the EU, which they left already. Everyone from EEA and Switzerland must apply, even those with permanent residency. Every person has to make application to the system, adults and children. Parents can link their children under 21 years of age into their application. The proof of status is digital only. The scheme is free, and non-EEA or Swiss family members of EEA and Swiss citizens in the UK must apply for a family permit. The application and proof of status is completely digital, and later in the presentation, Donald will explain you what consequences does this have for EU citizens in Newport on the digital status. Next, Alec. So the practical steps of applying for EU settlement scheme. The application is done online using an app on the gov.uk website. Identity documents are scanned using app. The rest of process is online. The whole process can be online if access to the app is unavailable, and paper application is available and can be ordered via email. There are organizations supporting people to complete the applications. So do not worry, we'll give you this information at the end of the presentation. We do have specific support here in Newport. Next slide. So what statuses people could get under the new EU settlement scheme? There are two main ones, which first one is pre-settled status, is for people who are living in the UK for less than 5 years. They can remain in the UK for 5 years from the date they got the pre-settled status, and then they can apply for full settled status. They can remain outside of the UK for up to 2 years, but advised no more than 6 months during 1 year, as this will break continuous residency and affect settled status. Pre-settled status is the same as limited leave to remain. Then we have the main one, which is a settled status for EU citizens. This is for people living in the UK for more than 5 years. They can remain indefinitely in the UK, and this is the same as indefinite leave to remain. They can remain outside of the UK for up to 5 years continuously. We also have individuals with pending applications who submitted their application by the end of the deadline, which was 30th of June 2021. And they have the rights protected until the application will be decided. We also have people here who have no status at the moment because they haven't applied. And we also have people who arrived after December 21, and they'll be on this new immigration status and they will require visa. Thank you, Alec. So in December, as part of our St. Nicholas celebration, which we organized for EU citizens in Newport, we did a short survey, and we have 80 plus individuals replying to our survey. They were from Czech, Slovak, Roma, Hungarian community. And in the short survey, we basically asked them how they feel in Newport post-Brexit. And surprisingly, 85% of EU citizens said they felt happy or very happy living in Newport, which was very nice to hear. 35% of them said that things had changed for worse since Brexit. That includes racism, insecure status, cost of living. 65% agreed that they felt safe living in Newport. And 49% agreed that the Newport is their home. And 45% agree that people in Newport are welcoming, which is also nice to hear. Next, Alec. And I think I leave you with Pav now to explain another survey done by 3 Million.
Thanks, Pavlina. I mean, I want to start by sharing with you the findings of a survey, and it's done by a UK-based organisation for EU citizens called 3 Million. In this survey, the participants shared their views on a number of issues post-Brexit. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to give you the headlines. If anybody does want to read the full report, we can send out the link to you. But what it essentially shows is that Brexit triggered a new sense of unease and uncertainty, with over 50% of the participants feeling that it increased the likelihood of them leaving the UK. And most of that uncertainty comes down to the rights an EU national or their family member has. Can we have the next slide, please, Alec? Some of you might have heard about no recourse to public funds, the NRPF, and what it means is that certain groups of people can't claim income-related benefits or access local authority accommodation. And when it comes to EU citizens with pre-settled status, they have an NRPF-like condition attached to their immigration status. And if they need to apply for benefits, they've got to show that they pass an extra test called the right to reside. And Eva's going to tell you more about this soon. But if the person isn't eligible for public funds, local authorities are going to need to consider whether their statutory duties are engaged to provide accommodation and financial support if the person or the family are destitute or at risk of homelessness. Can we have the next slide, please, Alec? Thank you. At the end of the day, you want to make sure you're giving the person the right advice according to any law, rules, and regulations. And some of the things that you can do are check the documentation, always ask for factual information and evidence. Sometimes people aren't sure exactly what status they have. Also, the family members might have a different status, so check the documents. You can also get a detailed financial assessment to determine their circumstances. Also, another important example of good practice is to get an interpreter if needed in the correct language. This is crucial, and it helps to make sure that they're getting the right information from the person, from you. So check the language. And if there's a dialect, don't just assume that just because a person is a Romanian national, that they're going to be speaking Romanian. Even though external organizations do have staff who can speak other languages, the responsibility is yours and the organization you work for to provide an interpreter. So you can use, for example, Language Line or the Wales Interpretation and Translation Service. Turning to partnership working, service users sometimes have lots of issues that need to be resolved. As you can see there, immigration advice, they might need expert welfare advice, housing support for EU migrants. So it's really essential that you know who you can refer and signpost people to. And something to be aware of, when people are in transition, they're at risk of exploitation or discrimination. So do be on the lookout for any signs. Can we have the next slide, please, Alec? This is the email address for the migration team. Do take it down for any queries you might have. And within the council, we've also got a hardship group which looks at cases where a person or a family are at risk of, say, destitution. Again, the best way is to get in touch with us by sending an email to this address. Alex, next slide, please. Thank you for listening. Over to Heather.
Thanks both. Great introduction, particularly considering the types of communities that we have in Newport and the numbers there, which were always quite surprising. I particularly like the multiple choice question where the answer was none of the choices. I thought that was very clever. But I think surprising for lots of people how many EU citizens we have living in Newport, and also interesting to consider some of our other migrant populations as well, because all of those people will have very different needs and be accessing services for different reasons. We're going to switch up the order a little bit just to manage timings. Alec, could we skip through to Trudy, please? She's on slide number 30. Trudy Aspinwall from TGP Cymru is going to talk to us about Roma communities in Newport. We've got some specific challenges around supporting our Roma families, Roma people living locally. And we thought it would be helpful just to give a bit of an overview around some of those challenges, what we can do as a collective to maybe overcome them. And hopefully sort of enlighten you and give you a little bit more information about what our Roma communities look like across the city. So I'll hand over to Trudy. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, so my name is Trudy Aspinwall. I'm the team manager of the Travelling Ahead project at TGP Cymru, and we run a Wales-wide EUSS support and advice service, working specifically and supporting Roma communities. I'm here with my colleague, Helena Nadova, who will also be contributing later. And Helena is one of our EUSS advice and support workers working specifically in Newport. I've just got about 8 minutes, and I cheated a bit by picking a short film to give you a bit of an overview around Roma communities and Roma history, which is just 3 minutes long. So Alec, if you'd be able to click on that link, and hopefully everybody can hear that. So it's 3 minutes long if everybody would like to have a watch, and then I'll link back in. Thanks.
Oh yeah, the thing is,
Okay, thanks, Alec. Okay, apologies there. There should have been sound with that, but as Heather said, it is actually just music, so you didn't miss any of the content. But of course, it doesn't sound at all like it did with music. It's a timely video because April the 8th is International Romani Day, International Roma Day across Europe, across the world, and so that is a week on Friday, and there will be various events going on. I think there's one in the riverfront this Wednesday, and some of the other agencies are commemorating and celebrating that day, sort of around Wales and around the UK. Alec, could you click onto the first slide, please? Thank you. So there's a link to that video with music in the slides here, and that's produced by the European Roma Rights Centre. Just going to talk really following on from that film, so I didn't have to talk a lot about the kind of historical context. A lot of people are confused about the term Roma. It's a kind of umbrella term which includes lots and lots of different ethnic groups, and it was adopted at the First World Romani Congress back in 1971, together with the Roman flag, which you saw in the film, the Roma anthem, and the International Day, the 8th of April. So Roma people are an ethnic group and protected against discrimination under the Equality Act, and also in terms of public services, there's a duty on public services to make sure that all ethnic groups are protected from discrimination, but also receive an equal and fair service. EU Roma communities living in Wales are distinct from what we might call gypsy and traveller communities, Welsh gypsies, Irish travellers, Scottish travellers maybe, and many people, clicking back down to the bottom one, not everybody identifies as Roma. Many people fear discrimination if they self-identify, but Roma is a term that is was adopted, if you like, but it's always really important for people to choose how they self-identify. Many of the families who've come to the UK and Wales will have come from really facing some quite difficult circumstances in their home countries. So as you saw in the film, there's a history of persecution and discrimination. Obviously the Holocaust is, one of the worst manifestations of that, but there's also much more recent continuation of that and recent history of discrimination and denial of basic rights in home countries. Lack of access to education, being segregated in education, sort of embedded poverty, not having access to work and jobs, not having access to basic facilities. Many people forced into living in inadequate accommodation and then forced kind of evictions from those, and a program of really horrific sterilisation and removal of children by some countries up until really quite recently, up until the 2000s. Recent police brutality you might have heard about. And so there's, many people have in their own countries from the Roma community particularly, have really experienced some very recent, within living memory and in current memory, discrimination. And this in lots of ways has moved or triggered many more people wanting to move to different countries for a better quality life and positive opportunities. And many of the families who've come to Wales, will have come, and as Pavlina and Pav said earlier, many families are really settled and happy to be, in a different country and recognise some of the opportunities that they have. But the impact on families who've gone through these sorts of experiences is, as I'm sure many of you will recognise, just a continued mistrust and fear of formal services and authorities based on their home country experiences. So that might include fear of the police, lack of trust of the police. It might also include children's services, social services. When people have had very negative experiences, they're going to be very fearful of authorities, local government, and the police, and that's just worth really bearing in mind. And we know that's still happens, now in Newport. After the early 2000s, many more Roma people migrated to Wales's cities. In Newport, most of the Roma community are from the Czech Republic, from Slovakia, from Romania, also Poland and Hungary. But we also have Bulgarian families, Turkish families, some from the Ukraine and Spain and France. So in our team, we see people from many different countries, but probably the biggest group are kind of Czech, Slovak, Romanian and Polish speaking in our experience at TGP. In terms of languages, Pav touched on this a bit earlier. I think it's really key for people to be aware that obviously most Roma people speak their home country language, so that might be Czech or it might be Slovakian, but most will also speak Romanes or Romani, which is usually an oral language, and many people may well not be confident in literacy in their home language, and Romanes is normally an oral language. And also has many dialects. So when it comes to working out if people do need translation and interpretation support, you need to be really clear what language people are most comfortable in, and not make assumptions about the language that people speak. As I've said, not everyone identifies as Roma. There's a fear of self-identification from their experiences in home country, but also in this country, and people fear they'll be discriminated against. And then that obviously also leads to an underestimate of numbers. So I think there's been no recent estimate of numbers of Roma families in Newport or any other of the South Wales cities. And as Pav and Pavlina spoke earlier, we've got, we know that there's an underestimate of all different communities. The census that's just taken place, when that information is available, it would be interesting to see how many people felt confident to identify as Roma. Actually, it's only within the last 10 years that there's even been the opportunity to identify as Roma in the census. So prior to that, there was no way of telling how many people there were from different communities in Wales. Could I have the next slide, Alex? So in terms of some of the challenges that we see and the issues that we'd really like you to be aware of for supporting Roma families, there's a really excellent resource here at the top, which is being developed by the Roma Support Group, and it's a toolkit, and it's for both third sector organisations and for local authorities around best practice in supporting Roma communities. So I'd really urge you all to have a read. That's not very long and it's really useful. But there's some key issues around the kind of support and some of the challenges that the Roma families that we work with are facing. There's often a lower awareness of rights. Many campaigns are not reaching the Roma community. That might be because they're not in language that is not in a wide enough range of languages, but also in terms of sort of people often don't feel it's relevant to them. So for example, the fact that you can still apply and need to apply to the EUSS, late applications are still open. The fact that if you arrive now, then you're no longer able to apply. The need to convert from pre-status to settled status, the need for your children to actually apply individually and separately from parents, and of course newborns coming into families also need to apply. All those things we're really picking up. The families are not getting that clear information, and very much the work that we do and the work that you as frontline practitioners need to do is to make sure that you're really well informed and that you can pass on the correct information to families that you're working with. There's a link there to some of the Welsh Government fact sheets which are for frontline workers as well. We know that there's a higher percentage of Roma families who are gaining pre-settled status rather than settled status, and as others have said, that has an impact on your entitlement to services, to support and to benefits, and that's something that we really need to make sure is being tackled and that you need to be aware of. Already mentioned is the increased vulnerability to exploitation and discrimination. We know that people are being charged for services that should be free, like EUSS advice and support. We know that people are being, charged for paperwork to be taken care of, and then they have no power over that and control over their own paperwork, and we know that there's a real reluctance to report any kind of exploitation, workplace or accommodation exploitation. So again, just be really aware of some of the experiences families are going through and access the special support that you'll hear about at the end of this session. Digital exclusion, Donald is doing a session on that, so I won't talk hugely about that, but we know that from this Roma support group research that only about 3% of Roma applicants said that they've got the confidence and the skills to submit and update their applications without support or to prove their digital status going forward. And we know that there are issues around with many people who won't have used email addresses before. Many people are not able to provide their own email addresses. Families might share an address, or they might have several. They might not have the logon details to it. When you're working with families, you need to be really sort of aware and thoughtful about the challenges that families may have, and they might not always be able to access some of the information that they should be able to. Similarly, digital exclusion in terms of not having the right equipment that might work with the EUSS apps. Lots of families share phones, share numbers, or change them regularly, and that all leads to problems with actually proving that you've got your settled status, and it may give you other problems in evidencing information and documents that you need. Those of you who are working in education and healthcare, those sorts of records are really important to support families as well who might not have other formal ID documents. Next slide, please, or last slide. Again, from the Roma support group research and the experience of all of us on this call presenting today, many people originally had national ID cards, and having passports was not something that people had or needed, and there was a real reluctance to send away this evidence to the Home Office. There's a real issue for Roma women in particular about being able to provide and sort of show evidence that they've been here, because if people aren't working and staying at home and looking after children, then you won't have work evidence, you won't have tax, national insurance, and you won't have you may not have your name on a rent agreement or a mortgage, for example. And often that means Roma women are getting pre-settled status when actually they could qualify for settled status. Again, school and medical records are really important in supporting Newport Roma families in getting the evidence they need for their settled status and their right to reside. Document and travel costs can be really prohibitive for large families. There is discretionary funding for some travel to embassies and consulates for renewing documents, for example, and us as support agencies can help with that. I've already touched on language and the fact that often many children and young people will have, of course, really good levels of English as they're going through the education system here, but there needs to be caution on relying on utilising children on confidential matters. COVID had a massive impact on the kind of face-to-face support that many of the families we work with really need and welcome, and there's some legacy then of the delays in being able to provide documentation, where, as others have said, people are still waiting really for, even though they've applied, they're waiting for the outcome for their EUSS applications, and the need for support is ongoing. Those support services like ours and others are small, and we really rely on and need local authority and public service partners to be sort of taking a part in supporting Roma families as well in Newport. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Trudy. And as we said, contact details for Trudy's organisation and everybody else that's presenting today will be forwarded after the end of the session, as well as the slides, so you'll be able to click on the links that are included in Trudy's part of the presentation as well. Thanks Trudy, that was really interesting. We're going to skip back now. Sorry Alex loving looking after the IT today. Back to slide 18 and hand over to Eva from Settled. We're going to go back to considering some of the specific rights and entitlements of EU citizens in Newport now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eva Plairova, and I work for Sato Charity, which is a new charity set up in 2019, specifically to help EU citizens to gain valid immigration status to be able to stay in the UK after Brexit. Next slide, Alak, please. Okay, so as we already mentioned today, the free movement has finished with Brexit, and that meant that the EU citizens who have lived in the UK previously had to secure immigration status to be able to exercise their citizens' rights. When people secure settled or pre-settled status, they are gaining a right to stay and live in the UK legally. They can rent and purchase a property, they can work, they can study. This is actually a big one for students, because international students who now entered the UK after 2021 have to pay the international fares, whereas it's a huge big difference between home fees, and also they have to apply for student visas and pay the health surcharge. So if they got a status, they lived in the UK and secured a status, they can pay home fees and they can apply for student finances, financial assistance like loans as well. Also, people are securing right to healthcare, right to welfare benefits and pensions. They can apply for a driving license. And as the leader mentioned earlier today, in Wales and Scotland, now all residents can vote in local and national elections. It is different for general elections, obviously, because you're voting for Westminster sort of thing. So in Wales and Scotland, people above 16 years can also participate in elections. Also, close family members can still join people who settled in the UK. And people are also gaining the right to travel outside and inside the UK, as it was mentioned that some people may struggle if they haven't secured a status and they have to leave the country to come back to the country. So if they got a status, they should be okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so the deadline has passed last year, end of June, but charity organizations always knew that there's going to be people who probably will not secure their status in time, and COVID hampered the situation even more. So Home Office still accepts late application as long as the applicant explain why they are putting in a late application. Home Office issued guidelines of what they consider as a good reason for late application. They say at the end that the list is not exhaustive, but most what we come across are children and care leavers. A lot of the time, it's nobody's fault really, because the parents thought they are doing the right thing. They are securing immigration status for themselves, and they thought that the children will be covered. And then they discovered after the deadline that no, actually children have to apply as well. And there are people who might have reduced mental capacity, for example, people with dementia who are residing in nursing homes. Those cases are quite complex, so they need help with that. Lasting medical conditions as well, it depends, it could, could be various reasons. People who have become victims of modern slavery or victims of domestic abuse, because obviously they will find it harder to get the evidence than the people who, who have access to all their paperwork. Then there could be other reasons as well. So for example, in Wales, we know that there are rural areas where there's sketchy internet access. Some people are just, you know, digital literacy is not on their radar. So we came across, for example, a couple where husband was Welsh, the wife had applied, she has lived here for a long time, spoke quite good English, but they struggled because they were in the 60s, they didn't have mobile phones, they didn't use internet at all they were using was a landline. So yeah, the reasons are various. But the most important thing is that people have to apply, because otherwise they are risking that they will be unlawful in the UK, and they will struggle to access services, and the worst case scenario, they could be deported. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so from 1st of July, employers are checking if people actually have right to work. Those employees who have been employed before the deadline, 30th of June 2020, do not have to. It's up to them if they want to check employees, because obviously if they have been working there for a while. But new employees have to be checked, and employers are using employer checking service. It is important to note here that people who have not secured yet their status, but they made a valid application, they are still covered by the same laws as under the freedom of movement. So they are issued a certificate of application, and they can generate a digital share code, but we came across employers and landlords who have not been accepting certificate of application, and this is wrong. They are basically breaking the law. So we encourage always people to, you know, when we speak to employers, to please read it carefully what it says, the certificate of application, because it says that it gives people, it guarantees people the same rights as before, until the application is actually decided, until the outcome of the decision comes. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, this should have been before. Okay. So just to say that it's not just late applications, but also people, close family members are still joining their families. There's no deadline for that. Here it's important to note who counts as a close family member. So it's married spouses or civil partners, durable partners. Here, durable partner, they must have been in a durable partnership by December 2020 for like 2 years. So if they formed a relationship after this date, then it is most likely that they are not eligible. Children, not just under 21, also children who are above 21 but are dependent, and this dependency has to be proved through evidence. Same for dependent parents. The dependency had to be established by end of year 2020, and they have to actually prove this through evidence. So dependency could be like financial, or if they rely on care because they have health needs. It is slightly different for Swiss citizens. They can form relationships until 2025, durable relationships, and they were still considered as family members. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now back to the rights now. Sorry, this was supposed to follow after work. So healthcare, people who secured settled or pre-settled status can access NHS for free. Those who also have resided in the UK before end of 2020 can still apply for free European healthcare insurance card, which gives them state-provided healthcare during a temporary stay in the EU country. I did not put it on a slide here, but just worth mentioning, if you come across people who might have been denied healthcare services or have been charged and you think it was unlawful, there's an organization called Doctors of the World UK who help with cases like this. They mostly help people with no recourse to public funds or asylum seekers who struggle to access healthcare. So they can look into this if you believe that somebody has not received the healthcare. Next slide, please. And the last one is the social security benefits. Those who have settled status, they can access benefits, no questions asked. Those with pre-settled status can apply for certain benefits like the PIP, disability living allowance, attendance allowance, carers allowance. However, if they want to apply for other benefits like the universal credit pension, credit housing benefit, they have to prove the right to reside. So that means they have to prove that they have worked and or their spouse. It is a bit more complicated. So usually when we are settled, want more information, we contact the Child Poverty Action group who have who do provide trainings as well, so they can explain this better. It is sort of rendered in if the people were living and working here, and if there shouldn't be a gap as well in employment, so it's a bit more complicated. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eva. We're going to move on to talk about the consequences of some of those rights or entitlements not being upheld. Sorry, just skipping through my slides. Can you skip on, please, Alec? Oh, Marie, you haven't got a nice introductory slide. So Marie from Newport Citizens Advice is going to take us through discrimination, what it is, how it may impact on EU citizens, and most importantly, what you can do to support people who may have experienced discrimination and also try to obviously avoid it through the provision of services to EU citizens in Newport. Thanks, Marie.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, so I'm Marie. I work in the Employment and Discrimination team for Newport Citizens Advice. Sorry for not doing an introductory nice slide. Yes, discrimination, what is it? That's such a huge question, but it's helpful to think of it as being treated worse than someone else. So that could be behaviour towards that person, or it could be that person's ignored. And it's because of, so discrimination, it's more than bullying, it's more than mistreating someone. It has to be protected in law by the Equality Act 2010. Discrimination has to be because of or linked to one of the 9 protected characteristics. So there's a number of reasons or characteristics, and the reason that they exist and that these 9 have been selected and protected by law is that people who belong to these 9 groups are more vulnerable than other people. So, for example, sex discrimination, so people of a certain gender might be treated worse. And then for our purposes today, the most common type of discrimination that we see against EU citizens at Newport Citizens Advice is race discrimination. So these individuals generally being treated worse because of their race. And the race is quite wide ranging. So that can include, as Trudy said, it can include someone's ethnicity. So that would be wide enough to include people from the Roma community. Also people's colour as well, the colour of someone's skin, their nationality or national origins. And so generally mistreatment of EU citizens that we've experienced is that clients are being treated worse because of their race. The reason that I'm going through this is so that hopefully we can all recognise what discrimination might look like, what it might be. So like I said, it can include being treated worse because of a person's race, for example, but it also might be behaviour towards someone. So that might be name calling, it could be even physical abusive behaviour towards that person. And it can also include a lack of behaviour. So that might be ostracising someone, ignoring them, leaving them out. Perhaps that person it doesn't have access to the rights that they should be getting access to. They're being ignored. Can I have the next slide please, Alec? So this is a tough question to answer. How can it be avoided? I wish there was an easier answer, as unfortunately clients generally access our service after they at least suspect that discrimination has already happened. But what we can try and do is to promote awareness of all of our services, and to try and recognise discrimination, what might be discriminatory behaviour, so that person being treated worse or unwanted behaviour towards them. At the Citizens Advice, we're able to spot trends, so looking at issues of social policy and recognising patterns. And I work in the employment team, which is linked with discrimination as well. And perhaps we might be able to spot trends and perhaps flag employers that are treating groups of individuals, perhaps people of certain races, including EU citizens, and they're treating them badly, and then we can take action. Under the Equality Act 2010, we're able to act in quite a proactive way. So we're able to get in touch with service providers, for example. So our service is much wider than just employment. The Equality Act covers discrimination by service providers, landlords, as well as public bodies, also associations as well. So we're able to get in touch with those people and act in a conciliatory way. So not necessarily going in heavy-handed and accusing anyone of anything, but trying to, if it's appropriate, and trying to bring a resolution for the client, having the client's best interests at heart. And yes, this conciliatory approach to perhaps educate that organisation, to then hopefully leave a legacy of understanding what discrimination is and how to avoid it in the future. Just briefly, there's a public sector equality duty under the Equality Act 2010 as well. So it's a positive duty, so it's a proactive obligation on service providers who are providing a public function, as well as public bodies, So, for example, it could be a housing association that's still acting as if they were a public body. So they have to go a step further than just not discriminating. So they have to try and proactively eliminate discrimination and then advance opportunity if there's a vulnerable group that's lacking opportunity in the community. So that's quite a helpful duty in some circumstances. Next slide, please, Alec. And then finally, who can help if there is discrimination? So all of us, really, everyone can. And we don't have to say for sure, this is discrimination, what can we do about it? But if we can just try and recognise what might be discrimination, and then you're absolutely very welcome to approach us and to approach Newport Citizens Advice and to seek advice, to try and recognise try and recognise what might be discrimination, what might be harassment under the Act. We take cases to tribunal very regularly. We've got that casework capability. But like I said, we always act in the client's best interests and try and conciliate and reduce the stress on the client as much as possible, leaving the legal route as the last step. But yes, we can help. We can try and educate service providers, employers, housing providers, and we also try and put out in our social media content on our website, trying to use at least bilingual information and leaflets, so multilingual information to get out there, to get people in touch with our service. And just touching upon what other people have said already about the language being so important. And I really like the comments about dialect as well. So not just the country's language, actually going that step further to ask what the client's dialect is, to make their understanding, make the service as accessible as possible. As well as the Equality Act, at Newport Citizens Advice, we can also give guidance, so not just to clients, as I said, to service providers as well, on the Human Rights Act 1998, which often interacts when there's an issue of discrimination. And then the next slide, please, Alec. Oh, sorry. That's okay. I'm just going to really briefly go through. I've got a couple of anonymised case studies, but just because I'm aware that we're a little bit pushed for time, I'll just go through. I'll just go through one of them, and then just briefly what we can learn really from the case study. So let's have a look. So this individual, who I've called Chris, and Chris is from Romania, and when he accessed our service, he spoke hardly any English, and so really benefited from coming through an interpreter. He also was unable to read English, so that caused a huge barrier at work, because he was expected to sign contracts and was given some paperwork, and no matter how inadequate it was still some paperwork that he didn't understand it. He felt absolutely forced to sign any of these agreements. It's likely that he was brought here not knowing why he was here. He thought he was here for training, but actually he ended up working extremely long hours for well below national minimum wage. And when he didn't receive any pay for 3 months, he eventually went to his manager, who fired him on the spot with no explanation. Unfortunately, Chris also had his accommodation tied into his job. So just to wrap up now, I'm very conscious of time. I think it's very important for us to be mindful of vulnerability when someone's when English is not their first language, and when they're the reasons that they're getting in touch with us about, when it involves a number of different main aspects of their life. So, for example, accommodation and their employment, it makes them even more vulnerable when when they can't understand what's happening to them. They've maybe signed something as well, and yeah, when all their systems intertwine, interact, and then that's all pulled away, it adds even more to vulnerability. And I understand that the contact details for Newport Citizens Advice will be provided along with everyone else's at the end. So please do feel free to get in touch if there's a human rights issue or a discrimination issue as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marie. We're going to move on to our sort of last delivered session before we wrap up with some myth busting, which will just be a recap of some of the content we've heard today, and some fact checking. So Donald from Newport Mind is going to talk to us now about digital status. This is something that's been mentioned a couple of times already within people's presentations, and some of the challenges around digital status and how to access and view it. So I'll hand over to Donald. Thanks, Donald.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be speaking about digital status today. So Alec, if you can start me off. So as highlighted by some of the other panelists, the EU settlement scheme process is mainly a digital application process that results in a digital-only status. So once someone is granted pre-settled or settled status, they will receive an application with an attached letter as a written notification of their leave. It's extremely important to note that this letter is not proof of their immigration status and cannot be used to prove their status to others. Alternatively, they're required to log in online to view and prove their immigration status. One of the things when we look at viewing and proving immigration status is when someone applies to the EU settlement scheme, the telephone number and email address they use are used to create a UK VI account. And that account is what they'll need to view and prove their status. So I always make sure to let applicants know if their email or telephone number they used when they applied for settled status changes, it's important that they update it, because they will need this information to view or prove their immigration status in the future. And if you've got the next slide, Alex. So as I just explained, there's a view and prove service online where people can log in and view their settled or pre-settled status online. And they can use to generate a share code that can be shared with anyone who wants to view their status. For example, the local authority, for benefits purposes, or for example, if they attend the GP and they're asked to prove their status, they would have to generate a share code, and then they can provide that to their employer or whoever's asking for their status. And whoever is asking for their status will have to enter their date of birth and the share code, and they'll be able to view their status online. If you've got the next slide, Alex. And here's an example of what someone would see online when they log into the View and Prove service. So it will have a picture that they that they took during the application process. It will say what status they have, and it will say how long that status is valid for. And on the bottom, what you can't see on the screen, there'll also be a section where they can prove their status. It will ask them what they would like to share their status for example, to prove their right to work, to prove their right to study, or to prove their right to live in the UK. And they'll be able to choose the appropriate response and generate a share code that they can share via email or print out. So if you go to the next slide. So when someone applies to the EU settlement scheme, if they haven't received a decision yet, they are still able to, their rights are still protected. And how they can evidence their rights while their application is pending is again through the View Improve service online. So since the 1st of July 2021, it has been a requirement to prove your status when making a new application for benefits and services and show your eligibility to work in the UK when applying for a new job. After applying to the EU settlement scheme, applicants will receive a digital certificate of application, which can be viewed online. It's important to note that they will also receive an email with an attachment with a certificate of application that they'll be able to print out. So once they receive this certificate, they will be able to log in online onto the View Improve service using the same details they used to apply for settled status, the same email and telephone number. And similar to the picture we showed in the previous slide, their picture will come up with a certificate of application. They will be able to share that certificate of application with anyone who's asking to see their status. One of the things that I will make a note of is if someone has applied via the paper route, it may take a while for them to be able to access a digital certificate of application. So please make a note. In some cases, if someone is not able to provide a certificate of application, it may be because they applied via the paper route. And if you need support or guidance surrounding certificate of applications, please can you contact one of the organizations that's presented today, and we can support you to ensure that we can get you a certificate of application. And if you go to the next slide. So some people will struggle to view and prove their pre-settled or settled status due to difficulties accessing or using the online service. One of the most common problems I find that applicants face is the inability to prove their status. In many cases, applicants are sent back home from work or denied access to services because they can't prove that they've applied to the EU settlement scheme, or they don't know how to share their status. When you're working with applicants who may have applied to the EU settlement scheme, I would advise you to get in touch with one of the organizations that I've presented today, and they'll be able to check whether an applicant has applied, chase up their application, or support them to share code with you. One of the easiest ways I would suggest you can do that is every Wednesday from 9 till 3, there's a community drop-in for EU nationals at Community House Eaton Road. So you can refer clients to that drop-in, and on the date, there will always be someone present who is able to support them to check their status, view Improve, or contact the Home Office about their application. And some of the factors that make it difficult for people to view and prove their status are, as other panelists have shared, language barriers. The majority of service users we support speak a language other than English or Welsh as their main or preferred language. And for some applicants, this is coupled with literacy issues. So the settlement scheme, as I've said before, the settlement scheme is a digital process. So for people who speak a language other than English or Welsh, navigating this digital system independently without language support can be difficult. And we found even in cases where applicants have felt confident doing it themselves, they've faced issues later on where they've been unable to fully understand correspondence from the Home Office or what the Home Office required of them. We often come across many applicants whose applications have been refused, but they've been unaware because they received an email from the Home Office and assumed that it was a grant of status and were unsure and assumed that there was no action needed on their part. And another barrier that we should mention is age and disability. So Newport Mind currently support people who are aged 50 and above. And one of the things that we found is for people of that age group, in some cases, they don't own a smartphone, or they may not have an email address or be able to manage that independently. For applicants who have applied to the EU settlement scheme or been given support following the grant of pre-settled or settled status, they often experience difficulty viewing and proving their status. Many applicants tell us that they would prefer if they had a physical document that they could show, as opposed to having to log in online and prove their status. Most of them complain that they can't do this independently. So when you're working with an applicant who may not have access to modern technology or may have difficulty proving their status, please take that in note. In addition, it's also important to note that some applicants have conditions involving a cognitive disability. People who lack mental capacity and whose family members or carers are unaware of the scheme could fail to access support to help them view or prove their status. This includes people who have a mental health problem. While some people with these conditions might be able to function at work or at home on their own, others might need constant support from family members to view or prove their status. So it's important to ask the right questions and to see if you can signpost people's support in these cases. It's also important to note that some applicants that we've worked with have physical health problems and disabilities that make it difficult for them to view and prove their status independently. Another significant factor is digital exclusion. While most people assume that everyone has access to modern technology, the pandemic has really shown us that for people who come from marginalized communities or for the most vulnerable, this is a significant barrier to people applying to the EU settlement scheme and viewing and proving their status. Some applicants have low digital literacy skills and struggle to independently use the view and prove system, or have lack of access to modern day technology or internet internet at home, so they're unable to view and prove their status. I would advise that, again, I would emphasize that if you're working with an applicant that you are unsure if they have, and you're unsure if they have applied to the EU settlement scheme, or you think they have applied and they can't provide any evidence of their pre-settled or settled status, please can you refer them to one of the organizations please can you refer them to Newport City Council or one of the organizations who've presented today. We are available to support applicants to contact the Home Office, view and prove their status, or in some cases, if necessary, make a new application to the EU settlement scheme where the application has been denied. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald. Really clear and really helpful. And I think you pick up on a really important point, the importance of having supportive conversations with people. So if you're coming into contact with people who either don't appear to have status or can't prove their status, don't just turn people away or tell them they're not eligible for service provision. Signpost them to somewhere that can help them to be able to work through that process, because we are still able to support people to gain the status that they need to access key services across the city. Thanks, Donald. Okay, so last session now is going to be delivered by Lowen from Newfields, who's going to take us through a few sort of common myths about EU citizens and the EUSS, and hopefully consolidate some of the new things that fingers crossed people have learned today. Thanks, Lowen.
Hello, so my name is Lowen and I'm currently working at Newfields Law on the firm's contract with the Welsh Government. And like Heather explained, I'll be going through some myth-busting questions today. Next slide, please. I cannot apply to the EUSS once the 30th of June 2021 deadline has passed. So this is incorrect. The Home Office is still accepting late applications to the European Settlement Scheme, and they have published a non-exhaustive list of reasons to make a late application. Next slide, please. Children do not need to make an application where their parent has applied. So this is also incorrect. Children must make an application to the European Settlement Scheme on their own basis. When their application to their parents to receive the same status as them. Next slide, please. Once I have pre-settled status, it will automatically update to settled status after 5 years. So this is incorrect. After residing for a period of 5 years in the UK, then an individual can then upgrade the pre-settled status to settled status, and they will have to reapply, make a new application themselves. Next slide, please. If I have criminal convictions, I will not be able to get a status under the European Settlement Scheme. This is also incorrect. The individual may still be able to get a status under the European Settlement Scheme. However, they must disclose this criminal conviction within their application, as this is the most important part. I should receive a card to prove my status. So this is incorrect also. All applicants to the European Settlement Scheme will not receive any physical proof of their status. And as of the 6th of April 2022, all applications to the European Settlement Scheme can be viewed online. Next slide, please. If I am an EU citizen and married to a British citizen, I do not need to apply to the European. Individuals in this scenario still need to apply independently. Next slide, please. My employer can end my contract after the 31st of December 2020 if I have not applied to the European Settlement Scheme. This is incorrect. For most EU, EEA and Swiss citizens with status under the European Settlement Scheme, employers can check their right to work using a share code. Individuals who are awaiting an outcome from the European Settlement Scheme may produce their certificate of application as proof that a valid application has been submitted, and this may be accepted. Next slide, please. If I do not have an identity document, I cannot apply to the European Settlement Scheme. So this is wrong. Due to the COVID-19, some ID documents may still be valid despite the expiry date. And where an individual is unable to access ID but would like to apply to the European Settlement Scheme, they can apply using a paper form. Next slide, please. If I have permanent residence, I do not need to apply to the European Settlement Scheme. So this is wrong. Individuals with permanent residence still need to make an application. You can provide evidence of your permanent residence in your application when you apply. Next slide, please. I have to be working or self-employed for 5 years to be eligible for settled status. So this is wrong. The EU settlement scheme is based on residence in the UK, not whether you are working. Therefore, you do not need to have worked, had health insurance, been in education to qualify under the European Settlement Scheme. The main requirement is that you have been resident in the UK before the 31st of December 2020. Next slide, please. So that's the end of the myth-busting questions. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the question box.
Thanks, Lowen. We're going to wrap up now. Helena's going to speak to us briefly about partner support. So to share the contact details and organisations that have presented to you today. Pavlina's also popped a leaflet for the drop-in that Donald mentioned into the chat. That's a really useful service to be aware of because it's, like it says on the tin, it's drop-in. People don't have to have an appointment. They can turn up to Community House, which is a trusted venue. We have a range of partners there that can provide advice around different issues. So please do take that away with you and use it for signposting. Whilst Helena is just recapping on the support that's available, Alec, I wonder if you could pop the poll back in the chat, and if I could just ask people just to spend a couple of minutes just redoing those series of questions, that would be really appreciated. Helena, over to you.
Thank you, Heather. My name is Helena. I'm working for TGP over 2.5 years, and I supporting Roma community, also helping before community over 11 years. And I'm still waiting for my page, my slide. Okay. Who is supporting EU immigrant people? Which organizations helping to applying for settled status? All organization is organized across Wales who are OISIC registered to support face-to-face information session, full application advice and support. Some organization is level 1 qualification, OISIC, TGP Cameroon, Citizen Advice, Newport Mind. Also is some OISIC qualification level 3, settle, and Newfields Law. They doing some complicated case, a special criminal record, or people don't have some evidence. We can't providing that it's complicated case, sending to Newfields Law and settle. And Newport partnership, people mentioned already, we're working together every Wednesday, but we're running some session in Friday, just only TGP is supporting settlements team in Community House. And remote support in phone and internet, Royal Association for Deaf People, and people have people are deaf, and right of women. And you can check website www.EUS settlements team, EUSS-Wales.com. This is detail all organizations who supporting settled status, settlements team, sorry. I think I'm so quick, sorry.
Thanks, Helena. Very good summary. Thank you very much. And like we said, the slides will be circulated, so you'll be able to click onto any links in there. That brings